Sound check. Oh, hey guys. Sorry about that. I forgot to charge my phone, so I was busy charging. I set the timer. I am ready to go live. So happy Monday, guys. Dr. Thompson here with the Wellness Way Yorkville. Hope you guys had a great weekend. And I know I'm going a little bit early, only because today is my daughter Grace's 16th birthday. So I want to get out of here and celebrate with her a little bit. Hope you don't mind. But today is very important. I'm going to talk about stress. I'm going to talk about how stress can actually kill you. Now, I apologize. You may notice I'm a little bit swollen on the side of my face. I had a dental procedure done on Friday, and so I'm still a little bit swollen from doing that. But no, I didn't ice, and no, it hurts a little bit, but I'm not taking pain medications or anything like that. But it's important to do this live, especially even with a little bit of a swollen face. I'll be a lot better within a couple of days. So, but this is kind of an expansion of what I did a year ago when it comes to stress. So I'm going to explain to you stress, why it can kill you, especially if you're not getting it under control. And yes, mental stress is a killer, but I'm going to talk about other forms of stress too and why you need to start getting that under control. So stress can absolutely be a killer. And obviously if you suffer with stress, but if you watch this whole video, you're going to see some of the things that happen when you have a lot of stress, which means it's going to cause changes to thyroid, change to the gastrointestinal system, to the immune system, to hormone function, and things like that. That's why everything works together. Kind of like a Swiss watch. This is why this is so important. But if you were from the Chicagoland area, you want to work with our office directly, I would be honored. And the place to do that is going to be at our next inflammation event, which is going to be Tuesday, February 4th, 6:00 p.m. This is an in-person event. So any kind of issues when it comes to weight loss, resistance, cancer, which really has to do a lot with the immune system, infertility, which there's a lot of inflammatory stressors that are taking place, thyroid. Most thyroid issues are an immune issue, inflammatory issue, as is arthritis, type 2 diabetes, autoimmunity, hormone problems, things like that. You have to start getting to the causes of why that's happening. So make sure that you register for that inflammation event. I can't wait to see you guys there. All you have to do is if you go to all of our socials, you'll see our link tree, at the top of our socials. So if you just click on that link tree, that website, that'll take you right to here. This is what it'll look like, and this is how you register for it. So the very first thing to pop up will be the inflammation event. Go ahead and click that. That'll take you to Eventbrite. You can register in about 60 seconds. It's free to attend. We do have a special gift for you at that event. But in addition to that, you'll see on there we have all kinds of awesome things and gifts and things like that on our Linktree profile. Like the Wellness Way No Sugar Guide. I think there's a free workout ebook as well. You can buy T-shirts on there, which are just absolutely awesome. And watch this too, because I will give you the code on how you can do some things in order to specific herbs and specific things. I'll explain to you why they happen. And I'll give you the code so that you can actually, I can authorize you to be able to get some of those things that will help either block a stress response or help with GABA conversion, which is very, very important to be able to calm you down and relax you. So, but before you dive into doing that, make sure you get to the inflammation talks. One of the most important things. Here's how you can register for it. It's going to be right there. Okay. So stress. Now, I added this slide in at the last minute. And it really got me thinking, and this is why I added in this slide, is the most important thing isn't whether you're sick or not, it's whether you're heading towards it. All right. Let me say that again, because I know a lot of people know that they're sick and they're moving in the wrong direction, but they wait until they see the physical manifestation of illness and sickness. And then they come to me expecting, some kind of miracle to reverse it in a couple of days. And it's simply just not true. That's why testing is so important in order to determine the direction that you are heading. This is why I say this is, let's say you're in an airplane and you're at 10,000 feet and you decide you're going to jump out of the airplane and you don't have a parachute. Okay. Just like this gentleman doesn't have a parachute, yet he is hurtling towards Earth at, 200 miles an hour or whatever the rate of acceleration is. And so you jump out of the airplane with your parachute and you catch up to him and you say, "Hey, buddy, you don't have a parachute." And he looks down, looks at you, and he says, "Well, so far, so good." But that's what a lot of people are in the United States, meaning right then and there, they think, "I'm fine. I'm doing, awesome." And that gentleman in this picture, he's doing fine. But within a few seconds, he's going to meet the harsh reality of gravity and physics. And so that's why where you're heading is so important. But there's a lot of people that aren't heading in the right direction. And this is also why when we do testing, it helps us to see if you're heading in the right direction or not. And so that you can course correct it before it turns into full-blown disease and things like that. I remember I had a consult today with a guy. He's lost about 40 pounds. And he was very young, pre-diabetic, extremely, extremely low, testosterone. And, he didn't have the physical manifestation of disease, but you could see looking at his labs, he was heading in the wrong direction fast. And I was like, this is your time to course correct before you end up with some kind of disease, especially. So the most important thing I would tell you is when you listen today, you got to figure out, am I heading in the right direction? This is one of the reasons why I go live, is because I really want you guys to start moving and start heading in the right direction. Okay. So let's talk about stress a little bit. Before I do that, I want to ask you a question. You can go ahead and put the answer in the comments. Please make sure that you do that. Please let me know where you're watching from. And also in the comments, go ahead and put the answer to this question. Who stresses out more, men or women? So go ahead and put the the comment, what you think, is true, is who stresses out more, men or women? And I'm starting to see comments starting to come in, and you're getting it correct. Yes, women. Women do stress out more. And here's my next question. What stresses women out the most? You guessed it. It's men. Or I would say this, it's relationships, which is why women can stress out quite a bit about their family. Okay. What stresses women out the most? By far, it's going to be relationships. What stresses men out the most? I would say by far, it's their job. And guys, when I say that women stress out more, it's not a deficiency, or it's not something that's wrong with you. You got to understand, it's just how you're built. It's just how you're built. You're built differently than men are, and that's just how you are. And you will stress out more. This is why I say lots of times, men, don't stress your ladies out, and because she's already stressed. And so you shouldn't be stressing her out even more. So what stresses women out the most? I'm going to say it's going to be men. Okay. Now, Let me preface by saying this is that being stressed is not a badge of honor. You know those people who just they wear their stress, on their shirts, on their sleeve all the time as if it's some kind of like they need some kind of medal they have to tell you how out they are all the time, as if it's something that's good. And if you know some of the negative consequences of being stressed for a long period of time, that's not something that you want to wear as a badge of honor. That would actually be like you being an alcoholic and being proud of it. Okay. So being stressed is not necessarily a badge of honor. Yet so many people walk around and brag about how stressed they are. I'm like, that's not necessarily a good thing. Okay. But I want to say this, not all stress is necessarily bad. Okay. There is bad stress, yes, especially when it overwhelms the body, but you do need a certain level of stress in order to be able to grow. And that's why you can't avoid all stress. But I want you to think of this. You give muscles some stress and they grow. You give the immune system a little bit of stress and it grows. This is why I always say exposure is so good. You look at these, people who go into a grocery store and they slather their kids with Purell, and antibacterial, things, and they try to give them the most sterile environment. It's like that's not true either. You need a certain level of stress in order to be able to grow. You need to stress the muscles in order to grow. You need to stress the immune system in order to grow. I will tell you this though, if you stress your muscles too much too soon, then yeah, it's going to cause some kind of injury. And this is why not all stress is bad. You do need some level of stress. Or what happens is if you live your life completely devoid of any kind of stress, here's what happens. You ever saw the movie Wall-E, in which they took all of these people in a spaceship up to Earth and they put no stress on their bodies, and all they did was wheel themselves around in a chair and eat all kinds of junk food. And then what happens is they can no longer walk and they all get very fat and obese. So you do need a certain level of stress in order to be able to grow, in order to be able to adapt. And here's the other thing too, is that moms, you need to put a little bit of stress on your kids. Dads, this is also true. You need to put a little bit of stress on your kids, because if you don't, then what happens is you end up with a 30-year-old man that still lives in your basement. I've had conversations with people in regards to this, and that's why I always say is that I'm kind but not necessarily nice, because if there's something that needs to be said, my kindness will say it needs to be said. I would rather you change and not like me than stay the same and stay sick. And so this is why, a lot of times when I go over stool tests with people, they have a lot of issues and they're carrying a lot of pathogenic bacteria and things like that. And they're like, well, how do I get rid of it? And I say, well, create an environment that's not hospitable for that certain bacteria to be able to grow. You have to change the environment. And it's also true, if you have a 30-year-old son that refuses to move out of your house, you don't want to be the bad person and kick them out. They're like, how do I do that? I'm like, change their environment, put them under a little bit of stress. So make them do their dishes, cook their own food, do their laundry, pay rent. And pretty soon they're going to realize I can do this on my own. And then they're going to move out, problem solved, because now you're not the bad person in regards to that. But I have seen some parents really, really mess up their kids by coddling them and by not giving them any kind of stress in order to get them to grow, in order to get them to adapt. And that's why a certain amount of stress is good. But stress can be bad when it starts to fill up your bucket faster than how your bucket can start to empty. The reason why I show this picture is this is an overflowing bucket. And you can get to the point where the body can no longer adapt to this. And what you see overflowing in the bucket is going to be symptoms, disease, whatever you want to call it, and inability to be able to adapt to your environment, especially. So let's go over the physiological response of stress, okay? Because I think if you understand what's happening inside of your body, you'll understand why this can manifest in so many different types of symptoms. So let's say you have a stressor, and the stressor is not all mental, even though we think it's all mental stress. It can be a chemical stressor. This has to do with your nutrition. This has to do with toxicity. It has to do with a lot of different things. Yes, you can have mental stressors, but how many of you know that you're probably carrying a lot of physical stressors, specifically on the spine and on the nerve system? And this is all processed by your brain. In fact, the brain is just in the nerve system is how it perceives stress. So it's perceived deep in the brain within the limbic system. And then it sends a message to, once it's perceived as stress, it'll send a message to the hypothalamus and then to the pituitary gland. That's why, when they talk about the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis, the hypothalamus pituitary testicular axis, they talk about how all of those organs start to communicate. Just remember this: they're communicating through hormones, but first it's stimulated by the nerve system. This is why having a nerve system that's not stressed out is so important. So it's stimulated by the perception of those stressors in the brain to the hypothalamus and then to the pituitary gland, which is secreting a lot of the stimulatory hormones. So one of the things that happens is this: the pituitary is going to secrete adrenal corticotropin hormone, which is going to then stimulate the release of cortisol by your adrenal glands, which are these glands that sit right above the kidneys. But the other thing is too, is anytime that you have any kind of stressor too, your nerve system will send a message through the sympathetic nerve system, which then runs down the spine, outside of the spine, and then can stimulate the release of adrenaline. Adrenaline is a very quick response, and in fact, this, if anybody's ever startled you or scared you and you felt that feeling in the pit of your stomach, that's the release of adrenaline. And then within 3 to 4 seconds, the heart starts to beat and you start going into a fight or flight type response. Adrenaline happens very quickly. Cortisol takes some time in order for that to be able to develop, but they're both are responses that are needed in order for you to have a fight or flight type of response. So when you have the release of some of those hormones, you'll go into a fight or flight response. So here's what happens. You're going to have increased blood sugar. There's a reason why that happens, because if a bear is chasing you, you need to start mobilizing blood sugar so that you have the glucose to be able to run, to jump, to contract your muscles and things like that. So it's not the body doing the wrong thing. You'll also get constriction of blood vessels, which is why your blood pressure starts to go up. It's going to absolutely slow down digestion to a halt, and you're going to absolutely not have any stomach acid. And the reason why is the body at that point doesn't want to start to digest food. It's not its priority at that point, which is why it can cause such issues with low stomach acid. You'll notice that the muscles around your spine will start to tighten, which is why a lot of people say, oh, I'm under stress. My neck hurts. My spine is so tight. And that's the body trying to protect itself from injury to the most important organs, which are going to be the brain, the neck, the spinal cord, the nerve system. Okay. And then the other thing that you will have is you're going to have a lowered immune system response. So it's going to lower down the immune system response. And that's by design, because if you have a fight or flight response and a bear is chasing you, and let's say a bear is chasing you and you sprain your ankle, the last thing that you want is for that ankle to get very inflamed. The last thing that you want is for that ankle to get painful and swollen and things like that, kind of like the side of my face after having a dental procedure. Okay. So all of these things happen when you are under a fight or flight response as a result of any kind of chemical, mental, or physical stressors as perceived by the nerve system. Now, this is something that a lot of people associate with a bear chasing you. And all those responses are needed. They're necessary if a bear is chasing you. But if you look at all those physiological responses that take place, what would happen if a bear chased you, you got away from the bear, and you climbed up a tree, the bear went away, and then your doctor comes and says, let's go ahead and test some things. Let's test your cortisol. Let's test your blood pressure. Let's test your cholesterol. Let's test your blood sugars. And I'm going to tell you something. If they did that and all of those were high, what if the doctor said, yep, we're going to put you on metformin, a blood pressure medication. We're going to put you on cholesterol medication. And at that point, you would be saying, but doc, don't you understand what I just went through? But that's the problem, is that how many times you go into the doctor and they ever talk to you about what's stressing you out, especially. Okay. Now, one of the things I want you guys to understand, because I'll ask this during the inflammation talk, I'm like, is that response when a bear is chasing you, is it the right response? People say yes. And then I'm like, well, what happens if you have high blood pressure as a result? Is that bad? They say yes. And I'm like, nope, it's needed. But it's the body doing exactly the right thing. It's not making a mistake. It's just trying to adapt to a stressor. The problem is that you have to ask this question, is what happens if that bear never stops chasing you? and then you'll just go into a chronic fight or flight response. The body's always going to respond appropriately, but then what's going to happen is you're going to start to see some physical changes with long-term stress. That's why short-term stress can be good, but long-term stress can be absolutely devastating on the body. So what happens if that bear never stops chasing you? And I'm going to go over some of the physiological responses that take place when you are under long-term stress so that you can understand why my body's trying to adapt in this way, okay? So what's a long-term adaptation to long-term stress, whether it be physical, chemical, or mental? One of the things that you have to understand is you just have to understand the sex hormone pathway. Remember, when you're under fight or flight, the body is going to release a lot of cortisol. And guys, I will tell you this is that so many health influencers, they try to demonize cortisol, and it's as if, like your body is malfunctioning. It's like, no, it's not. Cortisol is not necessarily a bad hormone, yet everybody thinks it's a bad hormone. The reason why I say this is if you never release cortisol, if you had no cortisol rhythm, you wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. So cortisol's main function is to try to mobilize blood sugars, especially. And that's why when you see women and they have long-term infection or they just have way too much stress and whatnot, and the adrenal glands can get very tired and they can get very fatigued. They're not going to respond in the same way, as a result. And this is why you have a woman, if she's very low cortisol, her energy is absolutely going to tank. And you know what? At that point, fasting is just completely contraindicated. No, you don't do that. You won't be able to mobilize blood sugars when you have no sugars anymore. When you don't have a constant stream of sugar. And that's why, some people are like, oh, I got to eat all the time. And it's like, well, you may have some issues with cortisol because you can't mobilize sugars if you're not eating every 3 to 4 hours, especially. But there's going to be a long-term adaptation on the cardiovascular system. And here's what happens. Number one, you're going to have chronically elevated blood sugars. That's why I'm going to go over blood work with people. Their fasting blood sugar might be really high, but their A1C is normal. And then I'll ask them, what kind of stress were you under when you came here? Did you almost get in a car accident? And yeah, many times they come in very, very stressed. And that's one of the reasons why you never ever want to look at fasting blood sugar by itself. You want to look at A1C, which is going to be a 90-day average of your blood sugars. So, but elevated blood sugars will absolutely damage not only the cardiovascular system, but basically all of your soft tissues, which is why you'll see changes in the skin, changes in kidney function, changes in the endothelial lining around the the actual arteries, and this includes arteries around the heart. You'll also have chronically elevated high blood pressure as well. And can you also have elevated cholesterol, LDL? The answer is yes, absolutely. And that's why we always say cholesterol is produced by the liver based on demand. If you have a higher demand, if you look at this sex hormone pathway, if you have a higher demand for cortisol because of stress, it needs to come from cholesterol because that's the backbone of how it's actually produced. So can your cholesterol elevate under high amounts of stress? Yes, it's the body doing exactly what it's supposed to do, okay? What are some other long-term adaptations to being chronically under stress? Well, start to see some changes manifest in the gastrointestinal system. Can you develop acid reflux? The answer is yes, 100%. You can. In fact, the biggest cause of acid reflux is actually hypochlorhydria or having low stomach acid. And what's the number one thing that causes low stomach acid? I'm going to say it's being in chronically fight or flight and trying to break down your food, and then you can't. Okay. Food's going to stay in the stomach for a long period of time. It's going to try to go down, hasn't been properly sterilized, hasn't been properly broken down, shoots it right back up. And as it shoots right back up and go into the esophagus a little bit and start to burn some of that tissue. You can also develop a lot of food allergies. Reason why I say a lot of food allergies is because to the gastrointestinal system under long-term stress causes a lowered response to break down your proteins. And when you have a bunch of undigested proteins that's running through the gastrointestinal system, if the small intestinal lining takes that in, it will start to respond to the food that you're eating and start to treat it as if it's a foreign invader. And this is why getting your foods tested can be so important, because when people say, yeah, but it's the foods that I'm eating, I'm like, that's the problem. You're not breaking down your foods the way that you were supposed to. And now the body is starting to treat that as a toxin. You can also develop a lot of gastrointestinal infections. This is why doing a stool test can be so important, because The purpose of stomach acid is not only to break down your proteins, but it's primarily to start to sterilize your food. This is why when people are on acid reflux medication, that's why they carry so much gastrointestinal infection, because they just don't properly sterilize their food, and having a chronic low stomach acid environment due to any kind of mental, chemical, or physical stressors. One of the things that it'll do is it'll just create an environment for pathogenic bacteria to grow within the gastrointestinal system. This is why this is so important. So, acid reflux, the development of a lot of food allergies, gastrointestinal infection, that is a long term adaptation. What about to your hormone system? Yes, look at this right here. Okay. So, number one, can you develop like functional hypothyroidism? The answer is yes. The reason why I say that is because when the body is exposed, the brain is exposed to high amounts of cortisol, the brain perceives that as stress. So, one of the things it will do is it will take that T3, which is the active thyroid hormone, and it will flip it into a mirror image so that the body can't use that. And you can measure this on a test. I know that some endocrinologists said this is a completely useless test. You know why they say it's useless? Because they can't do anything for it. But I have seen people under tremendous amount of mental stress have very, very high reverse T3. I've also seen people who are very, very sick have high reverse T3. And basically what the body is doing is say, hey, I'm under a tremendous amount of stress and we need to just down regulate my metabolism and everything else. And the times that I've seen high reverse T3 is either caused by high amounts of stress, or I've even seen when a person had active cancer and they just didn't know it yet. And I told them, I said, you need to go to the doctor and get this checked a little bit more. And they ended up having a pretty major form of cancer as well. But long-term adaptation to stress, how it affects your hormones, it can affect your thyroid. There's no doubt about it. But it can also cause a lot of menstrual cycle irregularity. And I want you to think about it. Remember, when you're under stress, the biggest thing that the body wants to do is it wants to get away from the bears, not concerned about your menstrual cycle. It's not concerned about anything else. It's just to fight to live. But if you look at this, one of the things that can happen is your progesterone production can get shunted into high cortisol production. And if that happens, then it's going to rob it from progesterone. And if it robs it from progesterone, you can start to see some changes with your menstrual cycle, meaning it's going to go short. Because after you ovulate, the corpus luteum actually produces progesterone, and that can go into producing cortisol if you're really, really stressed out. And then what happens is you ovulate, you can't maintain the endometrial lining, and then you just start shedding it too soon. So this is why a low progesterone environment can cause issues even with fertility, your fertility cycle, but it can also cause problems with your ability to be able to go past the first trimester, especially as you start going into the second trimester. And that has a lot to do with progesterone and things like that. But just think, if you're stressed, the body is always going to make cortisol. It's going to be willing to rob Peter to pay Paul to try to keep you alive. And that's why it can cause hormone issues, menstrual cycle irregularity. And you know what doctors do for it? They just put women on some kind of birth control and feed them more hormones, and not doing anything in order to lower down the stressors, especially. So long-term adaptation can be to your hormones. What's another long-term adaptation? Well, it's going to cause problems in your immune system that can lead to chronic infection. And yes, it can even lead to cancer. Just remember this. If you look at all these autoimmune medications, basically what they do is they lower down the immune system response, which is just like cutting out the tongue of a baby that's crying. And yes, you get the baby to stop crying. If you cut out his tongue, but you never got to the reason why the baby is crying in the first place. That's why also, if you look at a lot of these autoimmune drugs in the commercials, this is why they always say, don't use if you have an active infection or if you have tuberculosis. This can cause cancer long-term. And the only reason why is just because it just suppresses the immune system, and it can make you a lot more susceptible to bacteria, viral infections, and things like that. So long-term adaptation to high amounts of stress is that it will just devastate your immune system, especially. Who says so? This is even in PubMed from the Journal of Immunology 2004. So this is about 20 years old. There's a lot of words here, but let me give you a synopsis. Glucocorticoid hormones, which are going to be things like cortisol, cortisone, cause pronounced T cell apoptosis or T cell death, particularly in immature thymic T cells. So basically, what they're saying is high amounts of stress hormone cause death, especially to T cells, because they're just not spit out from the bone marrow. They have to develop within the thymus, and they can actually die off a lot quicker. So listen to this. The relative level of expression of the 1A promoter to the 1B, 1E promoters within a lymphocyte population was found to directly correlate with susceptibility to glucocorticoid-induced cell death, with the extremely glucocorticoid sensitive CD4, CD8 thymocytes having the highest levels of GR1A promoter activity. So basically what they're saying is what's the most sensitive to it? Some of the cells that are responsible for killing off cancer and basically killing off cells that are virally infected. Okay. So if you actually go and you look at glucocorticoid, any group of corticosteroids like hydrocortisone, which they used to give to a lot of people chronically inflamed, which are involved in metabolism of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and have anti-inflammatory activity. This is why when you look at the body, high levels of stress hormone also will lead to high levels of cortisone as well, because it can be converted into cortisone in order to dampen down the immune system response. This is why if a bear is chasing you, you sprain your ankle, it doesn't just blow up into a massive inflammatory response. So high levels of stress suppress the immune system response. Now, let me ask you a question. Is anybody even measuring it? Because chances are they probably aren't even measuring it by measuring your immune system response. This is just not doing a CBC, a complete blood count with doing a differential. This is actually looking at the type of lymphocytes that are present inside the body. So if you look at this person, yep, there's a high amounts of stress. So you can see their absolute CD4 cells, which are helping to identify foreign versus self, very low. And then there's CD8 cells, which are the very sniper specific cells that are responsible for killing off tumor cells. And for virally infected cells, you can see how low those things are. This is what just got me through the whole quote unquote pandemic, is that no doctors were actually measuring the immune response. They just said, let's just do healthcare communism for everyone. Rather than actually see who the most susceptible people were. And you could do this with a very simple test in order to see. And even if they are susceptible, the question is what are they doing in order to help build up an immune system response? But most people aren't doing anything in order to help build up a healthy immune system response. You got to have low stress as much as possible. It can't be any physical, mental, chemical stressors. And also you need to feed the immune system with high amounts of protein. Yes, vitamin D is going to be important, but also you need to facilitate good development of some of those T cells in the thymus. And this is why medicinal mushrooms can be so beneficial for some people. Okay. But you can see this person's very, very immunocompromised. And when you look at this, the question is, well, we measured it, and now you come up with a plan in order to help their immune system to start to recover. But I want to ask you a question. When does someone get mono, or when does someone get mononucleosis? Because so many times, people, they say, oh, I had mono when I was young, when I was in high school. I was like, okay, well, mono is caused by the Epstein-Barr virus, and 95% of people have that virus. So why did it grow and populate and just wreak havoc inside of your body? And the reason why is probably there's something that was going on that made you immunocompromised. And many times, when people get mono, they're like, oh, I wasn't sleeping. Oh, I was so stressed out. I was like, yeah, that suppressed the immune system, and any virus can cause issues with that. So when does someone get mono, which is coming from Epstein-Barr virus? Well, they're usually immunocompromised, or they're doing things in order to compromise their immune system. But the thing is when do people get, a Epstein-Barr reactivation? Well, usually they're under tremendous amounts of stress, and that's going to affect. That's why they call it chronic fatigue syndrome. It can even affect your thyroid, because that Epstein-Barr virus can infect the thyroid. And then basically what happens is the immune system, those CD8 cells have to go in and kill off those virally infected cells. And now you'll start to see the presence of antibodies. There's other reasons why that can happen too. You see some of the antibodies within the thyroid gland. Here's an article that comes from PubMed: stress-related Epstein-Barr virus reactivation. Okay. Epstein-Barr virus, EBV, remains latent in 90% of the patients following a primary infection. So just remember, people are like, oh, I caught Epstein-Barr. I'm like, most people have it. It's just the immune system is keeping it under control, is keeping it under wraps. Now, here's what they say. This is very important. I want you to listen to this. There is a significant difference between the rates of acute infection and reactivation among subjects with elevated cortisol and epinephrine levels. Okay. So basically, people with elevated cortisol, and yes, that can be due to stress. Yes, that can be due to not getting enough sleep, having a higher cortisol exposure. Yes, that can be related to blood sugar issues as well. But basically, what they found is that there's a big rate of infection and reactivation of Epstein-Barr when there's high levels of cortisol and there's high levels of some of the glucocorticoids that are coming from a stress response. Okay. Now, let me give you a clinical example. There's a woman, she came in, and what are the biggest things that are concerning you? And she said she was concerned with weight gain, Hashimoto's, and terrible bloating. Okay. Now, think of this: weight gain, Hashimoto's, and bloating. And as I want you to remember is that Hashimoto's in and of itself doesn't cause symptoms. However, Hashimoto's, if it's causing a change in the thyroid, then yes, is going to cause some of the symptoms, but those are hormonal related symptoms. And just remember, if you have any kind of Hashimoto's, you need to get to the immune response. That's the most important thing. But anytime you see someone and they gaining weight and they're experiencing a lot of bloating, you have to know that there is a massive, massive stress response that's going on. But she thought that all of her problems was because the doctor didn't have her thyroid medication perfectly aligned in order to have perfect levels, within that. And it goes a lot deeper than that. And here's what's so interesting is that even when you look at the x-ray, you see the presence of calcification of her thyroid. That means the thyroid is massively inflamed. But then you also see, if you look at the x-ray, here's the eyes, teeth, here's the back of the head. You can also see she was carrying a tremendous amount of physical stressors. Here is her x-ray of her neck, and this red line, that red line is normal. That where it needs to be. It's no different than blood pressure needing to be, 120 over 75 or whatever it might be. They always change the numbers all the time. But there is a normal for where your x-ray is supposed to be. And if it's out of that normal, one of the things that's happening is just adding to the stress that's being carried by the nerve system. This is why, guys, I've seen people's blood sugars change just by adjusting them and removing physical stressors. I've seen acid reflux resolve itself just by adjusting them and handling physical stressors. I've seen some pretty crazy things happen just by reducing stressors inside of the body. And you may say, oh, well, I went to the chiropractor, it didn't work. And I'm like, maybe they didn't address that there was more than one reason why. Or maybe they're just a bad chiropractor. I don't know. So I do actually see a lot of bad chiropractors, but it's not specific to the profession. I think there's just a lot of bad people who are bad at what they do in a lot of professions. I see a lot of bad teachers, a lot of bad doctors, bad chiropractors, bad pastors. I mean, you name it. They're just bad at what they do. But you start being really good at handling physical stressors. That is removing one of the things that can be leading to a chronic stress response. So one of the things I told her, I said, you need to be adjusted, number one. Number two, because you have so much bloating, you need to get your foods tested, you need to get a stool test. And then the third thing, which her doctor hadn't run, is I said, with what you are telling me, probably need a viral panel going on and actually look for the presence of viral infection, and things like that. But this was not just due to her thyroid and the doctor not figuring out, how to balance the thyroid medication perfectly. There's a lot of reasons that can be going on. And that's why you have to start testing properly and you have to start handling those things as well. So I went over the stress response and I went over the long-term adaptation. And you may be saying this, hey, doc, I get it. What on earth can I do? Okay. So I'm going to tell you something that you can do to put the parachute on before you hit the ground. One of the things you have to do is reduce everything that increases your cortisol exposure. Okay. Things that's causing unnecessary cortisol exposure. This is why testing can be so important. But this is why you got to reduce physical, chemical, and mental stressors. I know this sounds pretty simplistic, but I'm going to show you a little bit deeper as far as what you need to do. Okay. So physically, what can you do in order to lower down that cortisol exposure? So number one, get some x-rays done. Look at this picture on the left. Here's a near perfect x-ray. There's going to be a lot less stress carried on the nerve system when the spinal cord is in a nice and relaxed position versus when the head's getting shoved in front of the body. There's a lot of inflammation taking place into the spine, and there's no curve in the neck because all that does, because the spinal cord is tethered at the top of the neck, and it's also tethered down at what, T12, right around that area, which means that if you lengthen the spine by losing curves, then it just stretches the spinal cord. It puts the brain in a very high state of stress and things like that. So getting x-rays are important, and working with someone who knows how to do the proper things in order to start changing the x-ray is also very important. But I will also say this is over exercise can also be considered a physical stressor. And this is why for some people, I tell them to stop exercising until they can recover. Um, I've been guilty of over exercising in the past, totally, because I never do anything, half-assed. I just go all out. But I have been guilty of over exercising, and it's a lot easier for a man can over exercise and it not affect him as much than if a woman starts to over exercise, because one of the things it can do is really start to mess up your menstrual cycle. This is why having a plan to exercise is very important on when you know that you should really dial it up and when you should dial it back a little bit. And it shouldn't be just dialing up for 4 weeks. That's a good recipe for some issues to start to take place. But there's some women that I've told them, I don't want you elevating your heart rate. I don't want you getting a bunch of cortisol exposure. I don't want you to go to boot camp and just mindlessly exercise for 40 minutes, because you're going to see it's going to cause a lot of cortisol exposure as the body starts to mobilize blood sugars as a result of you just doing all kinds of exercise. So physical is a huge, huge issue. What can you do chemically? One of the biggest things I would tell you is watch your sugar intake. And you need to know what your A1C levels are. You also need to know what your insulin levels are. And the reason why is because blood sugar and your A1C, they're just telling you where you're at, but your insulin levels will give you a great understanding of how much sugar are you consuming, and are you building a response of so much insulin that you're going to become insulin resistant, which is going to lead to prediabetes and then finally to type 2 diabetes, things like that. But then the other thing too is sleep. Guys, sleep is so important. There's nothing that can replace sleep. Please don't tell me it's melatonin. There's nothing that can replace sleep. And that's why you should really be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep every single night, not just for one night, but consistently over the course of many weeks and many months, because that's one of the things that can lower down stress, cortisol, and things like that. And it can do an unbelievable job. There's nothing that will replace sleep, especially when you're talking about building up your hormones, and then also with repair and recovery. Okay. Now, what about from a mental standpoint? Can you test your cortisol rhythm or how your body is releasing cortisol? Yes, you absolutely can. This is called the Dutch test. Okay. This right here is how your body is supposed to release cortisol. It's supposed to wake you up in the morning. It's supposed to elevate as you go into the late morning, early afternoon, and then it's supposed to tail down at night and be at its lowest levels so that you can fall asleep and you can go to sleep. And then again, it'll build back up so that it wakes you up in the morning. That's why when people are like, oh man, I can't fall asleep and I can't wake up in the morning, I'm like, your cortisol rhythm is probably really, really messed up and you need to work on that. So if you test this, it needs to be in between these black lines. But if you look at this person, clear off the charts in her cortisol rhythm. So you can see she's got the rhythm, but it's just way too much cortisol. If you go over here, you can see her cortisol was through the roof. And yes, there were some blood sugar issues that were going on. But the biggest thing that was affecting her was a mental stress response, because she was a primary caretaker of a person with Alzheimer's. And yes, it was causing a massive stress response. And you know what? I didn't tell her to get over it. I knew that she couldn't. I just said that something needs to change in order to bring down this, or this is going to absolutely destroy you. And when she came in, it absolutely was. It was causing all kinds of hormone issues, hot flashes. She just felt like garbage basically all the time. So are there some things that you do? Number one, you need to test that cortisol rhythm. But number two, can you do things in order to block the stress response? Yes, you can. Okay. Probably my favorite is California poppy. No, this is not a drug or anything like that. It comes from the California poppy flower. But basically, California poppy is like a glass of wine without the brewer's yeast and without impairing your motor skills or anything like that. But it blocks the stress response. And yes, it does a tremendous job of relaxing you. Okay. Are there some other things? Yes. A lot of times we'll give people L-theanine when they are waking up, at 2 in the morning and can't go back to sleep. First thing I check first is correct your blood sugars if that's an issue. And yes, there's other things too. Chamomile, CBD oil. Yep, CBD oil helps to downregulate the sympathetic nerve system. Passion flower has a very calming effect, and valerian. Guys, please don't go out and order all of these. When we're testing people, I may recommend high doses of one in order to help with that response. Especially. So these things can do a wonderful job of blocking the stress response. But the biggest thing that I would tell you is start handling the stress maybe a little bit better. So the first thing, let me give you a couple of mental stress tips. These are things I'm going to preach to myself sometimes. Um, but remember this. Number one, you're not at the center of the universe. You just aren't. One of the biggest things that probably precludes people from walking into the gym is, number one, they think everybody's looking at them. Other than the illusion that they don't have time, and it's illusion. But they think, well, everybody is looking at me. And guess what? And people would say this in the gym. You know what I would say? I'd say, here's good news. You're not that important to them. They're not looking at you because they're worried about themselves because they think they're at the center of the universe. So you're not at the center of the universe. Okay. That's actually should be really, really good news for you as well. Number two, not every event is a bear. So you're the umpire. You get to choose if an event is going to be a bear or not. And that's why, in a game of baseball, it's not a strike, it's not a ball until the umpire calls it a ball or calls it a strike. And for you, it shouldn't be called stressed until you decide that I am going to call it stress. Not every event has to be a bear. Number three, this is absolutely huge. Please stop micromanaging. Please stop micromanaging. If you're a micromanager, I will tell you this, is that ask your friends, they probably don't want to be around you. And the reason why is if you're a chronic micromanager, not only do you stress yourself out, but you disempower everyone that you're around because you're trying to micromanage them as well. So you need to stop doing that. Number four, don't make other people's issues your issues. Or don't let other people who have issues, don't let them turn into your issues as well. That's something that is so, so important, especially seeing drama in churches. Being a former gym owner, where we would occasionally have drama, where someone would have a problem with us, and then they would try to go out and try to have everyone else have the same problem as well. And you know what? If someone tries to come to me and they're like, I have a problem with this person, you can't speak to them. You know what I say? I tell them to shut up. I really do. I'm like, I'm not going to remember that. Life is already is already complicated. And I'm not going to try to remember what the issue you have with that person when I have no issue with that person. I'm not going to make it my issue as well. And then the last thing is you need more self-reflection than self-care. Okay. And if you always need to take a self-care day, then I ask the question, maybe you need to work on self-reflection at the end of the day and figure out where you're messing up, in which you need to constantly be detaching from reality in order to get your mental health back. Chances are you need more self-reflection than self-care. But a lot of people don't go out and they don't reflect. At the end of the day, you should reflect and you say, did I do anything wrong? Is there anything that I need to correct? Anything that I need to fix? Otherwise, if you don't, and you just live your life with zero self-reflection, then this is why things can start to get out of control, especially. Dr. Nate, what can I take for mental stress? All right. Please don't take all of these. All of these have a very specific purpose. Well, you have things like L-theanine, which comes from green tea extract. And L-theanine, one of the things that it can promote is it can promote deeper sleep. Okay. Probably one of my favorites is actually ashwagandha. Ashwagandha works more like an adaptogen, more than as anything to try to stimulate. That would be more like licorice root or something like that. It works more like an adaptogen, which means if cortisol is low, can raise it back up. cortisol is high, can knock it back down. But the best thing about ashwagandha is the effect it has on the frontal brain in executive thought, which is also can help with people who have a lot of brain fog and things like that. But it also helps to regulate your circadian rhythm. So if you go and you see your circadian rhythm is way off, it can help to regulate that within a normal rhythm and a normal cycle. Um, Betaine hydrochloric acid doesn't help with mental stress. However, it helps to counteract the effects of stress, which is going to be chronically low stomach acid. And then there's also some brain therapeutics like Bacopa, passion flower, valerian, California poppy, kava, CBD oil. They all work a little bit different. And that's why I recommend that you work with someone who knows kind of what would be the best for you. But basically, all these things are helping with either mostly with GABA conversion or GABA reception, which is basically gamma aminobutyric acid, which is a neurotransmitter that helps to calm down the brain, especially. So I don't recommend that you take all of these things for these things, but sometimes I'll have people on 1, 2, at the most 3, take them in high doses in order to calm down that stress response, especially if they can't get themselves out of fight or flight, especially. The other thing that I would say is this is get adjusted. Not all stress is all mental. It can be physical. And this is why, like when I adjust a person the first time and the next time that I'll see them, I'll say, tell me what changed after that. 9 times out of 10, you know what they say? Oh, wow. I don't know what kind of witchcraft that you did, but I felt more calm, more relaxed. It's the best sleep that I've gotten in such a long period of time. And the reason why is it just takes down physical stressors, which then is going to have a hormonal response as well. And that's why you need to get adjusted. You really do, especially if you're dealing with a lot of physical stress because of its impact on what it does to the postural system, what it does to hormones and things like that. And you need to start taking down a lot of that physical stress, especially if you have. That's why getting an x-ray can be so important. So can you get some of those things? Yes, guys, you can. But this is why when people say, well, what's some of the best things that you can do? I would probably say California poppy. Another one can also be CBD oil. The one that we carry doesn't have any psychoactive components to it, so you're not going to get high, guys, from doing it. It's not going to happen, but it does a great job of helping to calm down the sympathetic nerve system as well. So all you have to do is if you go on that link tree, I showed you how to register for the inflammation event, but you can go and you'll see here, you go to visit the Wellness Way store. And if you use 5058 at checkout when you create an account, that will just authorize, say, Dr. Thompson said it was okay. You listen to this live video and it's okay for you to be able to get some of those things. I know that a lot of people use this for our tallow balm. So our beef tallow for the skin. We can't keep it in stock. Everybody wants that because they want good, healthy skin. Just remember, skin is an internal. If you want, yes, tallow balm can definitely help. There's no doubt about it. But this is why you need to be focused on skin from the inside out, because otherwise you keep rubbing things on your skin, but you have a bad internal environment. It may change it temporarily, but it's not going to make your life perfect. So this is why you go to the Wellness Way store and you can get some of those things, in order to help calm down that mental stress response as well. Okay. All right. So here's a final thought. You might need more self-reflection than self-care. Okay. This is why this is so important. And these are the chronic stressed out people, and they don't figure out why they're so stressed out. They don't figure out why they have such a high anxiety response. And you need to really be self-reflecting more than just saying, oh, I need a me day. Because if you are constantly having to escape to have a me day, then chances are you need to start looking at why you need to have a me day so often. So you might need more self-reflection than self-care. And remember this, it's not the load that breaks you down. It's the way that you carry it. And this is why if I gave you a bowling ball that was only 8 pounds, how would you carry it? Would you carry it here or would you carry it way out in front of you? If you carried it here, you can carry it a long distance. But if you carried it out in front of you, they both weigh only 8 pounds, but it's how you're actually carrying it. So this is why you have some people who have a lot of stressful situations and they do a fantastic job of being able to do it. And then you have some people literally one little thing happens and they absolutely fall apart because they're unable to be able to carry the stress in a proper fashion. It's one of my best quotes, like most favorite quote is this one. It's not the load that breaks you down. It's the way in which you carry it. And this is why, guys, coming up February 4th, 6 o'clock p.m., it's a Tuesday evening. This is why, guys, the inflammation talk is so critical. If you're from the Chicagoland area, please register for it right now, especially if you want to work with us, because it'll help bridge the gap between where you're at and where you need to head, especially whether you're having problems with weight loss resistance, problems with immune system in regards to cancer, hormone issues, thyroid issues, chronic inflammatory issues like arthritis, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune conditions, hormone balance. And let me say this. I love when doctors say, well, what do you treat? I'm like, I'm trying to get to the point that I don't have to treat it. Because really what we do is we build health, and the natural response of the body when you start building health is to heal. That's one of the biggest things. You got to stop being so focused on treating disease and treating that. That's a medical approach of taking a this for that type approach. And rather than think linearly, you need to think a lot bigger than that, which is why the Swiss watch principle plays into effect, especially when it comes to inflammation. So all you got to do is just go to the Linktree profile and register right there. Click on the inflammation event. That'll take you to not Linktree, but Eventbrite. Take you 60 seconds to register for it. And then my staff will be reaching out to you to confirm your attendance at that event. The only thing that we ask is if you register for it, that you're committed to going to it as well. So stress, here's how it can kill you. Is all stress bad? Nope. But when stress becomes too much, this is why it will start to spill over into a disease process, which is why it can lead to hormone issues, thyroid issues, gastrointestinal issues, cardiovascular issues, so much. And it's not the body messing up. It's the body continually trying to adapt until it no longer can adapt. And it starts to go into a disease process. Do I think that getting rid of stress is important? Absolutely. But you have to understand that a little bit of stress is actually good for you, and you can't have a life not of no stress, because having some stress is how you grow your muscles, how you grow your immune system, and it's how also you grow as a person. You just can't have too much. So guys, thank you so much for being on this live broadcast. I need to get going so that I can eat dinner with my family, my wife, my daughter who turned 16 years of age today. Oh, happy birthday, Grace. Time goes by really fast, doesn't it? So make sure that you do really good with your stress. And if you're from the Chicagoland area, make sure you get registered for that inflammation event. So guys, I love and appreciate all of you. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please make sure you like, follow, and share. Please make sure that you share this video with other person, because I know it will help them start to see stress from a different perspective. And that's what we're all about. So guys, I will see you next week for our live broadcast. And if you have a question, reach out to me. I love you guys all. I appreciate you all. Now get to it. As most importantly, is start doing rather than just listening. So we'll see you guys very soon. Thank you guys very much for listening. I'll see you next week.